In the shadowed chambers of medieval Europe, where stone walls bore witness to humanity's darkest impulses, a systematic culture of cruelty took root that would define an entire era. Between the 12th and 15th centuries, as cathedrals rose toward heaven and scholars debated theology in university halls, another kind of expertise was being perfected in the dungeons below. The art of extracting pain, confession, and submission through methodical torture reached levels of sophistication that would make these centuries synonymous with institutional brutality. What we're about to explore isn't merely a catalog of ancient cruelties, but rather the documented reality of how medieval societies transformed human suffering into a precise science. These weren't random acts of violence committed by mad rulers or sadistic individuals. Instead, they represented carefully designed systems of control, backed by legal authority, religious sanction, and bureaucratic precision that would have impressed modern administrators. The meticulous records left behind by medieval courts, inquisition tribunals, and royal chancelleries provide us with an uncomfortable window into how torture became not just accepted but institutionalized across European civilization. The medieval period stands apart in human history for its ghoulish inventiveness in devising methods to break the human body and spirit. What historians have termed the artistic skill of medieval torturers reflects a disturbing reality where inflicting pain became a specialized craft, complete with apprenticeships, professional techniques, and technological innovations. These were not crude beatings carried out in moments of rage, but calculated procedures designed to extract maximum suffering while keeping victims conscious and capable of providing the confessions or information their captors demanded. The sophistication of medieval torture reveals itself in the careful attention paid to psychological as well as physical torment. Torturers understood that the anticipation of pain could be as effective as the pain itself, leading to the development of elaborate theatrical displays designed to break a victim's will before the actual torture began. The sight of gleaming instruments arranged with surgical precision, the sound of mechanisms being tested, and the presence of official witnesses all combined to create an atmosphere of inevitable doom that often achieved its purpose without a single device being applied. What makes medieval torture particularly chilling is how thoroughly it was woven into the fabric of supposedly civilized society. These weren't the actions of barbarian tribes or criminal gangs, but the official policy of kingdoms that considered themselves the height of Christian civilization. Torture chambers operated under the authority of kings who claimed divine right, judges who swore oaths to uphold justice, and clerics who preached about mercy and forgiveness on Sunday mornings before overseeing interrogations on Monday afternoons. The rack emerges from historical records as perhaps the most infamous and meticulously documented torture device of the medieval period. This deceptively simple contraption, consisting of a wooden frame with rollers at each end, became the centerpiece of interrogation chambers across Europe. The victim would be secured with wrists chained to one roller and ankles fastened to the other, creating a human bridge of flesh that could be systematically stretched beyond the limits of bone and sinew. The genius of the rack lay not in its complexity but in its precision. Unlike cruder methods that might kill a victim too quickly, the rack allowed torturers to apply measured amounts of tension, gradually increasing pressure on joints and ligaments until the desired result was achieved. Historical accounts describe the sickening sounds that accompanied its use. The popping of dislocating joints, the crack of separating bones, and the screams of victims whose bodies were being systematically dismantled while they remained fully conscious. The rack's effectiveness extended far beyond its physical capabilities. The psychological impact of seeing this device, understanding its purpose, and anticipating its application often proved sufficient to extract confessions without its actual use. Medieval interrogators understood that the human imagination, when confronted with the prospect of having one's body slowly torn apart, could be more effective than the actual torture itself. Anne Askew's documented ordeal on the rack provides one of the most detailed historical accounts of medieval torture in practice. This Protestant reformer, condemned for heresy in 1546 during the reign of Henry VIII, endured multiple sessions on the rack in the Tower of London as authorities attempted to force her to reveal other Protestant conspirators. The meticulous records kept by her interrogators reveal the systematic nature of her torture, with each session carefully planned to increase pressure on her already damaged body. Askew's case illustrates the dual purpose served by the rack. While authorities genuinely sought information about Protestant networks, they also used her torture as a demonstration of what awaited those who challenged religious orthodoxy. Her eventual execution, requiring her captors to carry her to the stake because the rack had destroyed her ability to walk, served as a powerful warning to others who might consider similar resistance. The rack's popularity among medieval torturers stemmed from its versatility and the range of suffering it could inflict. Sessions could be brief, involving just enough stretching to dislocate joints and create excruciating pain without permanent damage, or they could be extended until limbs were literally torn from the victim's body. This graduated approach allowed interrogators to calibrate their torture to match the perceived severity of the victim's crimes or the importance of the information they sought. Historical records from across Europe document countless variations of the rack, each region developing its own refinements to the basic design. Some versions incorporated spikes that penetrated the victim's back as their body was stretched, simultaneously attacking the spinal cord and increasing both physical pain and psychological terror at the prospect of permanent paralysis. Others featured heated metal components that would burn the victim's flesh as it was being torn, adding another dimension to an already unbearable experience. The breaking wheel, known in some regions as the Catherine wheel, represented medieval torture at its most publicly brutal and theatrically spectacular. Unlike the rack, which typically operated in the privacy of dungeon chambers, the breaking wheel was designed for public consumption, combining execution with entertainment in a display that could draw thousands of spectators. The procedure began with the condemned being strapped spread-eagle to a large wooden wheel, their limbs positioned between the spokes or cogs that had been embedded in the wheel's surface. Using heavy iron bars or mallets, the executioner would then systematically shatter every major bone in the victim's body, working methodically from limbs toward the torso. The number and sequence of these bone-breaking blows were specified in the court's sentence, with more heinous criminals receiving the bottom-up treatment that could extend their agony for hours. The breaking wheel served multiple functions within medieval society beyond simple execution. It provided a spectacular public demonstration of royal or ecclesiastical power, entertained crowds who treated these events as social gatherings, and created a level of terror that served as an effective deterrent to potential criminals. The broken bodies were often left displayed on raised wheels for days or weeks, serving as constant reminders of what awaited those who transgressed against established authority. Archaeological evidence has provided concrete proof of the breaking wheel's actual use in medieval society. A particularly significant discovery in Milan revealed the skeletal remains of a young man, aged between 17 and 20, whose bones bore the characteristic pattern of injuries consistent with breaking wheel execution. The victim's remains showed symmetrical multiple fractures of the long bones in both arms and legs, with the breaks occurring at precise angles that indicated blows from a heavy weapon striking perpendicular to the bone structure. This archaeological evidence confirms that the breaking wheel was not merely a theoretical torture device described in legal codes and historical chronicles, but was actively employed in medieval justice systems. The systematic nature of the fractures found in the Milan skeleton demonstrates the methodical approach taken by medieval executioners, who had clearly developed techniques for maximizing the victim's suffering while ensuring the spectacle lasted long enough to satisfy the crowds who gathered to witness these events. The Spanish Inquisition transformed medieval torture from crude brutality into a refined science of human suffering, establishing bureaucratic systems that would influence interrogation methods for centuries to come. Beginning in the late 15th century, this institution created the world's first systematic approach to extracting information through carefully calibrated pain, complete with instruction manuals, official protocols, and meticulous record-keeping that documented every scream and confession. What distinguished Inquisition torture from earlier medieval methods was its calculated restraint and methodical application. Unlike the public spectacles of breaking wheels or the immediate devastation of racks, Inquisition torturers understood that information obtained through desperate attempts to escape pain was often unreliable. They developed sophisticated techniques that used torture intermittently, sometimes spacing sessions months apart, building cases patiently through multiple sources and methods, rather than relying on forced confessions alone. The papal bull authorizing clerical use of torture in 1252 marked a turning point in medieval jurisprudence, legitimizing what had previously been unofficial practice. More significantly, it led to the creation of detailed instruction manuals that codified torture techniques with the same precision that monastic scribes applied to copying religious texts. These manuals contained psychological strategies that modern interrogation experts would recognize, including methods for creating intimidation through the mere display of instruments and techniques for breaking down resistance without immediately resorting to physical violence. Manuel de Lucena's case provides extraordinary insight into how Inquisition torture functioned within this bureaucratic framework. Arrested in 1594 on charges of secretly practicing Judaism, de Lucena became the subject of an investigation that generated over 1,300 pages of documentation. Every aspect of his interrogation was recorded by scribes who attended torture sessions, creating an unprecedented historical record of medieval interrogation methods in practice. The documentation reveals how de Lucena's torture was not an isolated event, but part of a complex investigation involving over 100 suspected conversos. His suffering was methodically connected to testimony extracted from other victims, creating chains of accusation and counter-accusation that fed the Inquisition's machinery of persecution. The scribes recorded not only his confessions under torture, but also the names of others he implicated, demonstrating how medieval torture served to expand rather than conclude investigations. These records, preserved in climate-controlled archives, represent more than mere historical curiosities. They provide evidence of how torture was embedded within broader systems of social control, used not simply to punish individuals but to identify and eliminate entire communities deemed threatening to established authority. The Spanish Inquisition's target of conversos, former Jews and Muslims who had converted to Christianity, reflected political as much as religious motivations, aimed at eliminating rivals for power and wealth within Spanish society. Strapado emerged as one of the most enduring torture methods of the medieval period, its apparent simplicity masking a sophisticated understanding of human anatomy and pain tolerance. This technique involved binding the victim's hands behind their back and hoisting them up by a rope attached to their wrists, forcing the victim's entire body weight to be supported by dislocated shoulder joints. The resulting agony could be sustained for hours without causing immediate death, making it ideal for extended interrogations. The technique's three primary variants reflected different objectives and levels of severity. The basic method involved simple suspension, causing excruciating dislocation and muscle damage that often left survivors permanently disabled. The second variant incorporated sudden drops from height, with the victim's fall being violently arrested by the rope, typically shattering shoulder bones and destroying the joint structure entirely. The most severe version added weights to the victim's ankles, creating additional strain that could dislocate legs and spine simultaneously. Strapado's effectiveness lay in its ability to inflict maximum pain, while keeping victims conscious and capable of speech. Unlike crushing devices that might render victims unconscious or breaking wheels that caused immediate death, strappado maintained the victim in a state of acute suffering that could be prolonged indefinitely. This made it particularly valuable for interrogators seeking detailed confessions or information about conspirators and criminal networks. The technique's longevity demonstrates its effectiveness as a tool of coercion. From its origins in medieval Inquisition chambers to its use against political prisoners in modern conflicts, strappado has remained a constant in the arsenal of those who seek to break human resistance through systematic pain. Notable historical figures subjected to this torture include Italian political theorist Niccolò Machiavelli in 1513 and American Senator John McCain during his imprisonment in Vietnam, illustrating how medieval torture methods have transcended their original historical context. Medieval authorities developed an entire category of torture devices focused on crushing bones and destroying limbs. Recognizing that the systematic destruction of the human skeletal system created both immediate agony and lasting disability that served as permanent reminders of the consequences of challenging authority. These crushing devices shared common characteristics: mechanical simplicity that made them easy to construct and operate, devastating effectiveness that could destroy bones and joints with minimal effort, and psychological impact that made their mere presence sufficient to intimidate potential victims. The Spanish boot exemplified this approach to bone-crushing torture. Victims would have their legs encased in tight-fitting iron or wooden boots with wooden wedges then inserted between the boot and the leg. Using mallets or hammers, torturers would drive these wedges deeper, systematically shattering every bone in the victim's feet and lower legs. The confined space of the boot ensured that broken bone fragments would pierce surrounding tissue, creating compound fractures that guaranteed permanent disability even if the victim survived. Thumbscrews represented another evolution in crushing torture technology, demonstrating how medieval torturers developed specialized tools for attacking specific parts of the human body. These devices, mechanically similar to modern vises, consisted of two metal plates that could be tightened around the victim's thumbs or fingers. More sophisticated versions incorporated protruding studs or spikes on the interior surfaces, ensuring that the crushing process would be accompanied by penetrating wounds that added infection risk to the immediate trauma. The popularity of crushing devices among medieval torturers stemmed from their accessibility and versatility. Unlike complex mechanisms such as racks or breaking wheels that required skilled craftsmen to construct and maintain, crushing devices could be manufactured by any competent blacksmith or carpenter. This democratization of torture technology meant that even small towns and minor officials could maintain effective interrogation capabilities, spreading the culture of systematic cruelty throughout medieval society. Medieval torture specifically targeting women reveals the deeply misogynistic foundations of medieval justice systems, with specialized devices designed to attack feminine attributes and reproductive capabilities in ways that reinforced patriarchal control over female bodies and sexuality. These gender-specific tortures served multiple purposes beyond simple punishment, functioning as tools for policing female behavior, destroying women's social roles and creating lasting marks that would identify transgressors for life. The breast ripper stands as perhaps the most horrific example of gender-specific medieval torture, designed explicitly to destroy the physical attributes that defined women's roles in medieval society. This iron claw would be heated and then attached to the victim's breast before being forcibly pulled away, shredding breast tissue and often removing the entire breast along with portions of the chest wall. Women subjected to this torture faced not only excruciating immediate pain, but also the permanent loss of their ability to breastfeed future children, effectively eliminating their capacity to fulfill what medieval society considered women's primary function: The systematic nature of female-targeted torture extended beyond individual punishment to encompass broader social control mechanisms. Women convicted of adultery, pregnancy outside marriage, or practicing forms of healing that authorities deemed witchcraft faced tortures specifically designed to attack their sexuality and reproductive capacity. These punishments served as public demonstrations of what awaited women who transgressed against male-dominated social structures, creating a climate of fear that extended far beyond the immediate victims. The meticulous documentation of medieval torture reveals a bureaucratized system of violence that preserved detailed accounts for posterity, creating archives that provide modern historians with unprecedented insight into how systematic cruelty functioned within supposedly civilized societies. Despite the destruction of thousands of documents over the centuries, vast collections of torture records survive in Vatican archives, French repositories, and Spanish collections, containing testimony that ranges from victims' recorded screams to precise financial accounts of torture equipment costs. These archives contain expense records detailing the cost of ropes used to bind victims destined for burning, the price of constructing gallows and breaking wheels, and even maintenance costs for torture chambers and their equipment. Such meticulous financial record-keeping demonstrates how thoroughly torture was integrated into the administrative machinery of medieval governance, treated not as exceptional brutality, but as routine government expenditure requiring proper accounting and budgetary oversight. The preservation of these torture records reflects a chilling bureaucratic mentality that treated human suffering as administrative data requiring careful documentation. Scribes attended torture sessions with the same professional detachment they might bring to recording property transfers or tax collections, creating transcripts that captured not only forced confessions, but also the sounds of breaking bones, the duration of screams, and the precise moments when victims lost consciousness or died under interrogation. These documents reveal how medieval torture operated within complex legal frameworks that provided official justification for systematic cruelty. Court records specify the exact number of blows to be administered on breaking wheels, the duration of rack sessions, and the particular body parts to be targeted during interrogations. Such precision demonstrates that medieval torture was never random violence, but carefully calibrated punishment designed to extract maximum information while maintaining the appearance of legal procedure. The Iron Maiden represents perhaps the most misunderstood torture device of the medieval period, with popular imagination often exceeding historical reality in depicting its supposed use. While genuine medieval Iron Maidens remain historically questionable, the concept reflects the medieval fascination with creating enclosed spaces where victims could be subjected to prolonged torment without the possibility of escape or relief. Actual medieval confinement tortures relied on simpler but equally effective methods of psychological and physical destruction. The scavenger's daughter, a genuine medieval device, compressed victims into increasingly smaller iron hoops, forcing the human body into positions that gradually crushed internal organs while maintaining consciousness. Unlike the quick death promised by fictional Iron Maidens, this compression torture could extend suffering for days while slowly destroying the victim's ability to breathe or circulate blood. The oubliette, derived from the French word meaning to forget, created another form of confinement torture that relied on isolation and despair rather than immediate physical destruction. These narrow vertical chambers, often carved directly into castle foundations, were designed just large enough to hold a single person in standing position. Victims lowered into oubliettes faced the prospect of slow death through starvation, dehydration, and gradual madness brought on by complete sensory deprivation. Archaeological excavations of medieval castles have uncovered numerous examples of these forgotten chambers, many still containing the skeletal remains of long-dead prisoners. The bones tell stories of prolonged suffering, showing evidence of malnutrition, disease, and the desperate attempts of prisoners to claw their way out of smooth-walled stone chambers that offered no possibility of escape. Water torture emerged as another sophisticated medieval technique that exploited fundamental human survival instincts while leaving minimal physical evidence of abuse. The Chinese water torture, adopted and refined by medieval European interrogators, involved securing victims in position where single drops of water would fall repeatedly onto the same spot on their forehead or scalp. What began as minor irritation would gradually develop into excruciating pain, as the constant pressure created wounds that never had opportunity to heal. More aggressive water tortures included forced drowning sessions where victims would be submerged until the point of unconsciousness, then revived and subjected to repeated cycles of near-death experience. These techniques proved particularly effective because they created intense psychological trauma while leaving victims physically capable of providing detailed confessions about their alleged crimes or the identities of their accomplices. The cucking stool and ducking stool represented community-sanctioned forms of water torture specifically designed for women accused of various social transgressions. These devices, typically consisting of chairs mounted on long poles, would be used to repeatedly plunge accused women into ponds, rivers, or specially constructed dunking pools, while presented as tests of guilt or innocence. These procedures were designed to inflict punishment regardless of outcome, with survival often interpreted as evidence of supernatural protection and therefore proof of witchcraft. Medieval authorities understood that the public nature of these water tortures served important social functions beyond individual punishment. Communities gathered to witness ducking sessions, creating shared experiences of sanctioned violence that reinforced collective standards of acceptable behavior while providing entertainment that channeled potential social tensions into approved outlets of ritualized cruelty. Fire torture represented the ultimate expression of medieval justice, combining immediate physical agony with powerful religious symbolism that portrayed earthly suffering as preparation for eternal damnation. Burning at the stake served as the culmination of many torture sequences. But medieval authorities developed numerous preliminary fire tortures designed to extract confessions before proceeding to final execution. Red-hot pincers were used to tear flesh from living victims with heated iron tools applied to the most sensitive parts of the human body. These sessions often began with minor applications to fingers or toes, gradually escalating to attacks on genitals, eyes, and internal organs as interrogators sought to break down resistance through escalating waves of unbearable pain. Branding represented another category of fire torture that served both immediate punishment and permanent marking functions. Victims would have symbols burned into their flesh identifying their crimes, creating visible reminders that would follow them throughout any remaining life they might possess. The letters marking thieves, adulterers, heretics, and other transgressors became permanent stigma that excluded branded individuals from normal social participation even after their official punishment had concluded. The Spanish Inquisition developed particularly sophisticated fire tortures that demonstrated their commitment to extracting reliable information rather than simply inflicting random cruelty. Heated metal devices would be applied to feet, forcing victims to walk on red-hot iron plates or having molten metal poured into specially constructed boots. These techniques created agony so intense that victims would confess to virtually anything while remaining conscious and capable of providing detailed testimony about their alleged crimes and associates. The garrote represented a refinement of strangulation techniques that allowed executioners to control the dying process with precision unknown to simpler hanging methods. This device, consisting of an iron collar attached to a screw mechanism, could be tightened gradually to create slow strangulation that might extend over hours. Victims remained conscious throughout most of the process, experiencing the gradual restriction of breathing that created panic and desperation, while providing opportunities for last-minute confessions or revelations. Spanish of the garrote incorporated SP variant sikes or blades that would penetrate the victim's neck as the collar tightened, ensuring that survival was impossible while extending the duration of conscious suffering. These technical innovations reflected the medieval understanding that effective torture required balancing the victim's capacity for enduring pain against their ability to provide useful information to their captors. The head crusher exemplified medieval precision in targeting specific body parts for systematic destruction. This device consisted of a metal cap that fit over the victim's skull, connected to a screw mechanism that could apply gradually increasing pressure to the cranium. Initial pressure would force the victim's eyes from their sockets, followed by the crushing of facial bones and eventual penetration of the skull itself. What made the head crusher particularly effective was its ability to create escalating levels of agony while maintaining the victim's consciousness until the final moments of cranial destruction. Interrogators could control the pace of crushing, pausing at intervals to allow victims opportunities to confess or provide information before proceeding to irreversible stages of the torture process. Judas cradle torture represented medieval ingenuity in creating prolonged suffering through the exploitation of gravity and human anatomy. Victims would be positioned above a pyramid-shaped device and slowly lowered onto its pointed apex, with their body weight creating gradual penetration that could extend over days. The positioning prevented victims from achieving any comfortable posture while ensuring that movement would only increase their agony. This technique proved particularly valuable for extracting detailed confessions, because victims retained full consciousness and speaking ability throughout extended torture sessions. The gradual nature of the penetration meant that interrogators could maintain constant communication with their subjects, encouraging confessions through promises of quicker death or threats of prolonged continuation. The medieval period's systematic development of torture techniques created a legacy that extended far beyond the historical boundaries of the Middle Ages. These methods established precedents for state-sanctioned cruelty that would influence interrogation practices, judicial procedures, and military tactics for centuries to come. The bureaucratic frameworks developed by institutions like the Spanish Inquisition provided models for organizing systematic violence that modern totalitarian regimes would adapt and refine for their own purposes. The psychological insights gained through medieval torture experimentation contributed to understanding of human pain tolerance, resistance breaking, and information extraction that would inform interrogation techniques used in conflicts ranging from colonial suppressions to modern intelligence operations. The careful documentation of victim responses, breaking points, and confession patterns created databases of human suffering that served as reference materials for future practitioners of systematic cruelty. Perhaps most significantly, medieval torture established cultural precedents for accepting institutional violence as legitimate governmental activity when properly authorized and administered through official channels. The legal frameworks that sanctioned torture, the religious justifications that portrayed suffering as spiritually beneficial, and the social mechanisms that encouraged public participation in ritualized cruelty created foundations for state-sponsored violence that would persist long after medieval political structures had disappeared. The archives documenting medieval torture continue to yield new insights into how systematic cruelty functions within organized societies. Recent scholarly analysis of Inquisition records has revealed sophisticated psychological techniques that anticipated modern interrogation methods by centuries. While archaeological discoveries continue to provide physical evidence of torture practices that historical documents had only described in abstract terms, these findings challenge comfortable assumptions about historical progress and human civilization, demonstrating that the capacity for systematic cruelty exists within apparently advanced societies when appropriate institutional structures and ideological justifications align to authorize such practices. The medieval period serves as a reminder that technological sophistication and cultural achievement provide no guarantee against the emergence of systematic violence, when political, religious, or social conditions create demand for such techniques. The enduring fascination with medieval torture reflects deeper questions about human nature and the thin boundaries that separate civilized behavior from systematic cruelty. Understanding these historical precedents becomes essential for recognizing similar patterns in contemporary contexts, where modern technology and bureaucratic efficiency might enable systematic violence that exceeds even medieval capabilities for inflicting suffering on targeted populations. The medieval mind's capacity for systematic cruelty extended beyond individual torture sessions into elaborate public spectacles designed to demonstrate absolute authority while providing mass entertainment for gathered crowds. These public tortures served multiple functions within medieval society, creating shared experiences of sanctioned violence that reinforce social hierarchies while channeling potential unrest into approved outlets of ritualized brutality. Drawing and quartering represented the pinnacle of public execution theater, reserved for those guilty of high treason against the crown. The condemned would first be dragged through streets on a wooden hurdle, allowing crowds to witness their humiliation and physical deterioration before the main event. Upon reaching the execution ground, victims would be hanged until nearly dead, then cut down while still conscious to experience the subsequent stages of their destruction. The systematic disembowelment that followed required skilled executioners capable of removing internal organs while maintaining the victim's consciousness and ability to witness their own dismemberment. Contemporary accounts describe the crowd's reactions as executioners displayed still beating hearts and steaming entrails, creating moments of horrified fascination that bound spectators together in collective participation in state-sanctioned violence. The final quartering process involved attaching the victim's limbs to horses that would pull in opposite directions until the body separated completely. This climactic moment often required executioners to make preliminary cuts at major joints, as human bodies proved remarkably resistant to being torn apart even by the considerable force generated by trained war horses pulling against each other. These documented methods of medieval torture stand as testament to humanity's capacity for systematic cruelty when institutional power removes moral constraints. The meticulous records preserved in archives across Europe serve not merely as historical curiosities, but as essential warnings about how quickly civilized societies can embrace organized brutality when fear, ideology, and unchecked authority converge. Understanding these dark chapters remains crucial for recognizing similar patterns in our own time and ensuring such systematic dehumanization never again finds institutional sanctuary.